33 knots at 90 degrees, you're encroaching on the limits of the aircraft.
Closely studying the airport, investigators uncover another piece of the puzzle. Maintenance issues and the storm itself were forcing controllers to use runway 24L for landings. It is the shortest runway at the airport. Blinded by rain, driven by unexpected winds, and landing on the shortest runway, Flight 358 was in a dangerous position.
Over the previous 4 hours, they had been made aware of the terrible storms and red alerts. And that was for me my biggest concern. Were they perhaps overtired? Were they lax, victims of routine? In any case, it's obvious that they hadn't gauged the extent of the danger.
It's evident that the flight crew didn't perceive the information that they were getting from these various sources as being threatening. Therefore, they attempted to make a landing.
In these conditions, landing should have been tricky, but not impossible. Investigators still don't understand why this plane crashed. In August 2005, during a severe thunderstorm, an Air France jet crashed off a runway in Toronto. To try to understand the crash better, investigators turned to the past. In 1999, an eerily similar accident took place in Little Rock, Arkansas. Struggling with unpredictable weather, the crew of an American Airlines jet landed their plane, only to have it skid off the runway. 11 people were killed. Greg Feith helped investigate that crash.
One of the first things that I thought about was déjà vu. Having the first bits of information about the Air France accident, it reminded me so much of the American Airlines accident.
In the Little Rock crash, Feith discovered that the crew had made a critical mistake which contributed significantly to the accident.
They hadn't followed all of the checklist procedures, and they didn't have the ground spoilers armed, which basically degrades the efficiency of lift on the wing and settles the airplane heavily on the main wheels so that braking action is more effective.
Spoilers are only one of several ways pilots stop their massive planes. Reverse thrusters are used to redirect the engine power forward as the plane lands, and sophisticated brakes help slow the jets down. To rule out any mechanical fault, all three systems are examined by investigators of the Air France crash. One of the brakes on Flight 358 was destroyed in the fire, but the other brakes are all tested after the accident. All of them are working properly.
Flaps 2. Let's speed.
Investigators in Toronto also discover that, unlike in the Little Rock crash, this time the spoilers were used properly.
Gear down, spoilers armed, 4 green.
And when the engines are examined, the reverse thrusters are deployed. No obvious mechanical fault can be found. But as the investigation continues, a French newspaper prints a bombshell. Le Figaro publishes a story claiming that the thrust reversers were not turned on until the plane had been on the runway for more than 12 seconds.
As
for Captain Rosay, he confirmed the newspaper report. His explanation was that his co-pilot had tense-stopped and was having difficulty controlling the lateral movement of the plane. No doubt because of the strong crosswinds and because the runway was so slippery, his hand was clamped tightly on the throttle release lever, which prevented the captain from reaching it himself. So the reverse thrusters could not be activated.
Shortly after the newspaper story appears, investigators publish their initial report. It confirms Le Figaro's version of events. Canada's Transportation Safety Board reveals that, while the thrusters were found in their on position at the crash site, they had not been deployed as soon as the plane landed. In fact, it took 17 seconds before they reached maximum power.
The delay was a question raised in the report, and I wouldn't want to hazard a guess as to why there was such a delay or what was the cause of it. I just know that pilots, as a rule, want to get those reversers in as quickly as possible for maximum stopping.
The investigators reveal other confusing facts about the last few seconds of Flight 358. When it came over the start of the runway, it was twice as high as it should have been. And when it did land, it was nearly halfway down the runway.
Put it down! Put it down!
In these stormy conditions, the crew didn't have enough time to stop.
Once they found that the airplane had floated down the runway, the pilot has to make the decision whether we stay on the ground and try to salvage this bad situation, or we abort the landing, power up, pull up, and go around, get our stuff together, and then come back for a second landing.
But decisions in a cockpit are joint decisions. The captain and the first officer work together.
Si le commandant
If the captain sees that landing will be difficult, he must open throttle and go through abort landing procedures. That's his duty.
C'est une obligation.
And of course, the co-pilot is also allowed to be the first to act. But the captain's duty is to avoid at all costs a lengthy touchdown. That is clear.
Pour ne pas laisser se dérouler un atterrissage trop long, ça c'est clair.
By the time the plane touched down, it had only 1,500 meters to stop. And when it did land, critical seconds were lost when the reverse thrusters weren't engaged.
Est-ce que l'action des reverses immédiate?
Would it have made a difference to immediately activate the reverse thrusters? Of course it would. Since reverse function reaches its peak efficiency at high speed, that is the exact moment of touchdown, that's what reverse is there for. It's all a matter of aerodynamic braking. The other problem is that the wheels touched ground in the middle of the runway, and reverse or no reverse, at that point it was already too late, as was pointed out by the head of the inquiry. That being said, if the reverse thrusters had been activated immediately, the plane would have come to a stop more quickly.
Il serait sorti moins et moins vite.
In heavy storms, the margin for error is razor thin. On this rain-filled afternoon, sudden wind, a long landing, and a short runway sealed the fate of everyone on board Flight 358. What concerns some in the aviation industry isn't this particular flight, but the reality that overruns are far too common. They happen all around the world. And safety procedures that could stop them aren't in place. In August 2005, Air France Flight 358 crashed off the end of a runway in Toronto. It was a horrifying incident, yet amazingly, everyone survived. But Flight 358 wasn't the only jet to go off the end of a runway that year. Worldwide, there were 37 other runway overruns. And the causes of all these accidents were remarkably similar.
There are a number of causal factors that occur again and again in runway overrun accidents. The weather conditions, the state of the runway surface. It can be wet, it can be icy, it can have snow on it, speed in excess of a normal approach speed for the aircraft that does not then bleed off as the aircraft attempts to land. And these factors occur again and again in runway overrun accidents.
Unlike the crash at Toronto, some overruns are deadly. This Southwest Airlines flight in Chicago slid off its runway several months after the Air France crash. A small child was killed in a car that was driving on the nearby highway.
Many older airports, in particular in big cities which have expanded out towards the airport in the course of their growth, are constrained in the area that they can use for overruns.
You have to consider what happens when the runway is contaminated. Snow, ice, standing water. That will degrade the stopping performance of the airplane. Add to that a tailwind component, which was existent at the time that Air France landed. That, in combination with the contaminated runway, can jeopardize the landing performance and in fact increase it probably by 50%.
The International Civil Aviation Organization recommends that